There. So, welcome to this RUE revision for National 5. You may be familiar with this PowerPoint. It's something that I made prior to the FABs, but I thought it might be useful before to use again before any exam, whether it be FAB, prelim, final SQA exam, just to go over some of the most common questions you can be asked at National 5 and the type of things you're expected to do. So, reading for understanding, analysis, and evaluation. I'll try and make this quite interactive. I would encourage you to pause and have a go at things. By all means, you can just watch the video through. You probably get more out of it if you do stop, because then you can see what you've understood and what you haven't understood. But there's certainly two ways to do it, and this slide demonstrates that. So, what techniques do you think in question types, when we talk about understanding questions or evaluation questions, what do you think that means? Because the reality is RUE is extremely structured, and what an understanding question asks you to do is what an understanding question's always asking you to do. And whilst the content of the passage changes, the steps you take to answer the questions doesn't really change. So I would pause just now and have a go. What do you think understanding questions are? What are analysis questions? And what are evaluation questions? And I will pick you up on the next slide. Okay, now, if you're stuck, here's some examples. So own words, word choice, effective ending, explain writer's points, effective introduction, summarising, imagery, sentence structure, linking, tone, use of language, and contrast. Now, these are all things with varying degrees of frequency come up in RUE past papers and previous exams and tests. Which ones are understanding? Which ones are analysis? And which ones are evaluation? And again, pause it and see if you can work it out for yourself. Now I am going to change the slide. Okay, so we've got that original table again. So you've now got choices to go back and forward and get that sorted. And if you're completely struggling or you've had a go, here is the answer. Understanding questions are always own words. You always have to try and use your own words as much as you can. You are generally asked to explain the writer's ideas, but linking and summarising both come under understanding. So understanding is generally where you have to explain what the passage is about, the what, as it were. Analysis is the technique part of the paper, so that includes the techniques of word choice, imagery, sentence structure, tone, contrast, and sometimes the overall heading of use of language, which means you can have anything. And then evaluation is if understanding is what, analysis is how, evaluation is more how well. So how effective is the conclusion, how effective is the introduction? Now I've put them in that order because in recent years, conclusion has come up much more than introduction. And to be honest, I think effective conclusion's a wee bit easier than effective introduction, just because the introduction can be challenging because it's literally the first thing you're reading. So those are the types of questions, okay? And you should have some idea of how you answer a word choice question, how you do the link question and so on, but that's hopefully what we'll address over the course of this PowerPoint. Okay, article is here. Now, there's two ways of getting it, or three really. If you want, you can bring it up on another device using the QR code, or you can cut and paste this off and open it up into another window in the hyperlink, or just go into Google, put Guardian and put this bit here, funeral for fish and chips, and it should bring up the article. Now, the article itself is massive. Each week, The Guardian releases what it calls its long reads, and they are very long. And I would say they're really good practice. For those of you wanting to go on to do higher next year, it's good to start practicing reading harder things, because obviously at higher there's two passages in RUE, and it's good to keep developing your skills. But we are not going to be using that whole article. So you have a choice. You are welcome to read the whole thing. So pause just now, read the whole thing, get a sense of it. But I have taken the sections of it that I want to use for the purposes of this revision PowerPoint. Okay, now bizarrely, what is a bit of an unusual twist for me, I'm going to start with evaluation question so that we can look at effective introduction. The reason why, if you think we don't do a lot of evaluation, and I know my pupils will be the first to say that I'm the same, it's because it's very hard for teachers to revise this because of the amount of reading you have to do. To do an effective introduction, you need to read a whole passage in order to understand how it, what it introduced. It can be quite tricky to do out of context. But effective conclusion is really hard to do because it absolutely requires you to link back. So you need to have read a whole article. So to do a whole article every time you want to do one question, it is quite challenging. So that is why you may find these are the questions you do the least amount of. I would remind you, the most they'll ever be out of is two. It's very unusual for SQA to put effective introduction and effective conclusion in. They do one or the other. And like I say, in previous years, it has been more effective conclusion, although we know I've probably just jinxed that now. So it's only 2 marks. So it is not worth getting too upset about when it is just 2 marks. But I hope this will show you that what you do to get those marks, basically. So as you can see here, what we're going to do is I have copied the passage. Sorry, I'm just fixing things on the recording and turning off notifications. There we go. You'll see here on the right in the red box, I have just cut and pasted the paragraph from the article. So if you can't get the article up or you're working off one device, do not panic. Everything you need is here. And what I have done as well is I've highlighted the information you need to support you. So there are 2 questions you're going to do, and one is the first one you're just going to think about, what is the article or opening about? So out of nowhere, I've given you all this information. What is it about? And then what are the main points that you think the article's introducing? So we've got one summer ago, before the region's fish and chip industry was shaken by closures, before a death that was hard for people to bear, a lorry heaped with the first fresh potatoes of the season drove along the east coast of Scotland. So you can see immediately you've been given information that it's got something to do with potatoes and fish and chips and things like that. Now, what I would like you to do is read that paragraph for me to yourself. Okay. Now, if you're still reading, pause so that I'm not putting you off. But if you have read it, you'll notice in yellow, I've tried to show you, because when we say what's something about, pupils can look a bit blankly. Find the information. Now, you can take a highlighter into the exam, you can use it in tests, and that can reduce down the information so you're focused on what is important, because you've got a lot of information there, but not for what is this about. Those 2 bits in yellow are the things that really tell you what's going on. Okay, oops, I've jumped ahead there. My mouse mat's getting excited. So basically, what is the article about? Now, these aren't, obviously, this is not the way SQA will ask you, but I'm breaking it down for you just now. So just what is it about? And then what are the main points you think the article is introducing? Now, this is very much an understanding question. I haven't made this an analysis question. I've asked you about points and ideas, not language. So what I would like you to do just now is take these 2 yellow sections and put them in your own words. So what the 2 things you think this article is, this paragraph is about. Now, I would like you to pause whilst you make a wee note, and it's always best. You shouldn't be worried, and I'll say this now, you should not be worried about getting things wrong. When you get things wrong, you learn more from mistakes you make. And I'm not advocating making loads of mistakes just so you can learn from them. But if you never have a go, you don't really know what you've understood. 'Cause you'll be like, oh yeah, I kind of thought it was that. It lets you see how right or wrong you are. And no one's going to know, no one's looking at it. So you can be like, oh, I totally misunderstood that. And you can fix it. But if you're just wanting to passively go through this, you may not get the same out of it. So let's have a look at what I thought the answers were. So, the main point of this is fish and chip shops in Fife or Scotland are struggling to survive. And the reason I broke that into 2 was to show you sometimes some of you think you're being asked secret special questions, but sometimes you need to just understand what am I reading and now I can answer the question. So number two says, what are the main points that you think the article is introducing? So I've got here, chippies in Scotland are struggling to survive. Extremely important to local finances or business, so they make money. You'll notice I am not using the phrase region's economy. Got to use my own words here. And people will travel miles to taste them, and that is, the idea of shocking distances. So again, this idea, despite the popularity and the real importance financially of these chippies, they are struggling to make money, and they're struggling to survive. Many of them are closing, can't use closing, shutting down. So that should give you an idea. Now, how effective is the opening in conveying the writer's ideas? That's what we've done. Okay, I've just broken it down to make it a bit more simplistic for you. So, hope that makes sense. Now, I should say you could have been asked, how is language used in an effect, how is language used to effectively introduce the writer's ideas? In which case, perhaps you would look at punctuation or the list or something like that. But I've opted to focus on understanding here. Right, let's look at understanding questions. These will take up the vast majority of the exam. Usually out of a 30-mark exam, say 2 marks on effective introduction or conclusion. So that's 28. Generally, I would say about 16 marks or so go in understanding. So it gives you an idea. The vast majority of what you're going to be asked to do will go in this. And often there is a 6-mark summarising question. So understanding should not be ignored. Okay. So I've changed it to blue now for a different type question. Pardon me, what we've got here is a very small summarising question. I'm only asking for 3 things here. Remember, the point of summarising is you reduce it down. Now, I absolutely recommend highlighter or using your pencil to underline. Obviously, this is on the screen, but when you're in a test situation, there is nothing wrong with annotating your test. It's your test. The only time I would say never annotates when it's textbook, obviously. If it's on paper, absolutely. And I think many of you make this harder for yourselves than you need to. I think as someone with an English degree, I would absolutely find the 3 things and I would highlight them or underline them so that I can then translate them into my own words. Many of you try to identify and translate simultaneously. Now, some of you can do it, but some of you're cramming your brains, I think, with too much to do. And I'm sure as we go through this, we'll find that sometimes I've put an answer in the answer scheme and I've copied a word over. Everyone does it because the word is fresh in your mind. It's so easy to just copy it over. But you've got to be really careful because words like adjectives, describing words, nouns, adjectives and verbs especially need to be changed. Nouns, it depends on the noun. You're not expected to change proper nouns, but the reality is you shouldn't really be copying them over. So it is about as much as possible. Now, this gets stricter at higher. So the stricter you are with yourself at National 5, the easier, hopefully, you'll find own words if you come to do higher, where it is really quite strict, the use of own words. So let's focus on this. Question 1 here says, summarise the reasons for the crisis in the industry. So we know from the previous question, the fish and chip industry in East Fife is struggling, and this is going to tell you why. Now, it is always easier when the teacher reads it. So I'm not going to read it to you. I want you to pause it because obviously part of the issue is you taking in all these words on your own. So I want you to pause it. Now, I will stop talking briefly in order for you to have time to pause, but I won't stop long enough because otherwise it's going to be a really weird video of, me not talking and you not sure if it's broken. So you're going to pause, read, and have a go at the question. Now, remember, you are finding 3 things and then you are putting them in your own words, and I would bullet point them. So pause me now. Okay, now you won't have finished. You won't be anywhere near finished. Make sure you've paused me and I'm going to change the slide. Now, if you're struggling, what I've opted to do here is, and also if you're trying to do this quickly, what I've done is I have now taken the answers, I've put them in red. Now you'll see I've highlighted a couple of different things here. Some of them are connected, but there are three distinct points here. Now what you can do very quickly in your head, and again, you could always pause again, is what is another way of saying war in Ukraine? What is another way of saying Brexit has driven up prices of almost all the goods that fish and chip shops depend on? And what's another way of saying rising energy costs or energy bills? And even if you've not got a pen, you can definitely do that bit in your head just now. Okay, now I'm going to bring up the answer. So pause if you're still trying to do this, either in your head or by pen. Okay, international conflicts. Don't say war. You absolutely cannot have war. Ukraine isn't really helping you here, so there's no point sitting writing it out. Conflict, you absolutely should be able to come up with fighting abroad or international conflict or something like that. Brexit, domestic issues, or to say what Brexit is, Britain left the EU. But you've got like domestic issues. So one's about things going on abroad and things, the issue is, situation going on in Britain at home. And then you've got, in terms of rising energy costs, energy bills, you've got paying for their fuel or increasing prices to cook food. Don't use energy, okay? Fuel, something like that, or bigger, higher prices, that sort of thing, okay? You can't say rising bills or energy or costs. They are pretty common words. Or what you can do is think, what do those last two things mean? Well, they both mean things are more expensive. So chippies are struggling to pay for things. Okay. So there's 4 points there, but you only need 3. And hopefully you got at least 1 or 2 of those. If you're struggling, feel free to take it back and work it through again. I'm going to move on to the next question. Okay, so we've got an explaining question here. It's 2 marks, which is pretty standard. Read information from the passage and you need to reduce it down again, but you're going to pay attention to the number of marks available and you must use your own words. So what is the writer's point in these lines? So that's a pretty normal National 5 question. Explain what the writer's point is in these lines, or what's the writer's argument. So we're looking for 2 things the writer says. Now this time I will read it. It says, before the main danger to fish and chip shops was the quarterly energy bill, it was sudden fire. Ignored for a moment, the hot cooking fat can get too hot, rising to an auto ignition point and exploding. In a single year, 2018, there were serious fires at Old Salties in Glasgow, the Admiral in Overseal, Mr Chips in Fakenham, the Pilton Fryer in Pilton, the Fish Bar in Fenham Crossroads and King Standing, Graylings in Fremington. I feel like I'm saying a lot of words that aren't real. And the River Lane Fish Bar in Norfolk, the Port Fish Bar in Rowley Regis, Bruno's in Canvey Island, Jimmy's Palace in Liverpool, Scoffs in Paynton, and Moby Dick in Shirley. I feel like a number of those fish and chip shops were maybe made up. Doesn't matter how experienced you are, said Chris Lewis, one of the owners of the Wee Chippy in Anstruther. If something mechanical goes or something catches, you haven't seen it. That's it. That's your time. Now, there's a lot of information here, and I've put this in because it is about knowing what's important and what's not important, which is a really important skill RUE is trying to teach you. What you're going to do is you're going to pause this and try and work out what the 2 things the writer's trying to say. If you're stuck, I have put some support in on the next slide where I've highlighted the 2 answers and you can work from that. Try and do it yourself first, pause, and then move on. If you're super stuck, you can go straight, or you're in a hurry, you can go straight to the next slide. And I'm going to click now. Okay, so what we've got here is sudden fire and serious fires. And then we've got if something mechanical goes or something catches. So you can see here, that's what we're looking at. Now, it's important to note the bit that I'm struggling to read out loud. I've left that in to show you sometimes there is a lot of information, but it's not relevant to the answer or directly relevant to the answer that you're having to give. So that is what reading closely is about. So what are the answers here then? We're most likely to burn down. As you can imagine, we won't accept fire. Okay. And then, or a number of chip shops have burned down or had serious blazes or incidents. Now, they're the same point. You're not getting 2 marks for that, you're 1 mark for that. and had technological breakdowns to replace mechanical. Or you can just say if you're struggling for another word for mechanical and you couldn't think of technological, remember there are other ways to say it. Things like their machinery breaks down. Now that's about as close to mechanical as you would get, their cookers breakdown, something like that. SQA answer schemes, if you've ever looked at them, are about 30 pages long, some of them. At National 5, they're often about 10 pages to 15 pages long because of the amount of answers that you can be given to try and cover all the things pupils might say. So something about fire and something about mechanical, but don't use those words. So I hope that makes sense. If you're struggling, feel free to take it back and go through it again. Okay, dreaded link question now. I've been a teacher for a long time. Every year pupils just look at me horrified with the link question. It is the most structured thing we have, but there are a couple of common mistakes. I'll try and go through them. And I did shorten the article to make it simpler so this would work. Now, the first paragraph is the one that you did before, and the second paragraph is the one you've already done. So you have actually already read both of these paragraphs. So you're not being asked to read loads. Now, I've left both paragraphs in because you need to see the link. Just putting a bit of it in is not going to help you here. Now, remember, the sentence is not highlighted, but you'll be told, line 20 or whatever, is a link, or explain the function of line 20. Remember the formula. It's quote from the link sentence that links back. Now, remember, you must have the direction in it. If you just say it links, you'll not get anything. You must specify whether the link goes backwards or forwards for you. So quote from the link that links backwards, explain how, quote from the previous paragraph, quote from the link that links forward, and explain how, or quote from that paragraph. Now, I'll break this down. Now, at National 5, it's only 2 marks. At higher, it's 2 marks, but at higher, you must do all of this. Now, my class know I make them do it like this so that, it's good practice for higher. It's also, if you've mucked it up, you could still get full marks because you might have your quotes correct, or you may have gotten one section right and the other section wrong, or something like that. So I normally make my classes do a bit more for this just to make sure they get the 2 marks. So remember, this is the sentence. Before the main danger to fish and chip shops was the quarterly energy bill, it was sudden fire. Please do not quote the whole sentence. You cannot say the whole thing's a link because SQA has already told you that. It also can't all link back and it can't all link forward. You also can't ask SQA to give you a mark for an entire sentence. You never get marks for quotes that long. And for a sentence they gave you, you must break it up. Okay, so absolutely essential that you remember that steps 1 and 3 here, the quotes must be broken up. So you quote a bit, you say, like you quote a bit the sentence, you then say it links backwards, you then read this bit, you decide which bit it links back to, and you explain how. Now you can quote as well from this paragraph, which is ideal. You can also do a bit of both if you feel you're not being clear or you're really good for time, and that's good practice for higher as well. At higher, you don't get marks for quoting, you have to put all of this in at higher. But basically, for going forward, you then quote the bit that links forward, and you then quote and explain how that's the case here. Okay, so have a go, see if you can do it, and if you can't do it, I will be explaining it and breaking it down on the next slide. So pause me now and give it a go. Right, next slide. So what we've got here is energy bills, or the quarterly energy bill. Yeah, let's just fix that. So energy bill linked back. So you'll notice I've got my direction in and I've cut it quite short. If you wrote quarterly energy bill, totally fine. Before the main danger to fish and chip shops was the quarterly energy bill, yeah, that's okay, but be careful. If it gets really long, you get into danger about how long your quote is. But the main answer is this idea of the energy bill, and it links back because to this bit here where we're told as the price of gas and electricity threatened to double, then triple. And you can say where it describes rising energy costs or rising costs, power costs. Okay, there's nothing wrong with them quoting twice at National 5. Sudden fire links forward. Remember, you must put your direction in or you don't get the mark. And serious fires, you've got a list of all the places that burn down. You've got something catchies, which is another way of saying fire. So you'll see here, I've put as explains the number of businesses who have had a number of blazes in 2018, serious fires, something catchies. So this is a great answer. Okay. This would, this is what they would be looking for at higher, just without the quotes. In steps 2 and 4. But at National 5, sometimes you get a mark just for steps 1 and 3. You can get two marks for steps 1 and 2, 2 marks for steps 3 and 4. There's a lot of flexibility usually at National 5. It is so worth giving the linking question a go. Okay, if you want to go through that again, feel free. Okay, but I am now going to move on to the next question, which is another explaining question. So you can see here, it says, explain what the writer's points are in these lines. So you can see here, I'm keeping it quite open at the moment. Explain what the writer's argument is, or the writer gives reasons for blah, blah, blah. Explain these in your own words. There are different ways to phrase it, but this is essentially giving you the most basic version of that question, if it makes sense. Now, again, I am going to have you read this yourself. There will be support on the next slide, and I will get you there. So I would like you to pause and read it. And if you have time, also have a go at doing the question without the help. I'm going to go on to the next slide where I will be giving you some help. Oh, looks something going dreadfully wrong with my PowerPoint here. Hang on. Okay, hopefully my computer stopped going a bit wonky. Right, there we go. Okay, so we have the answers here. Now remember, I'm breaking this down for you. In the final exam, of course, you need to come up with something yourself. So you would do this highlighting for yourself, but for the purposes of support, I'm just trying to break it down for you so you're getting something out of it if you are finding it challenging. So we've got rising costs, eating out less, charge more, few proprietors dared breach the holy barrier of £10. So explain 2 of those. What is the writer's point here? Now remember, all of the writer's points are coming back to the crisis that fish and chip shops are facing. So what do these things tell us? Now, if you've struggled, pause me now and even try and do it in your head. What's another way of saying rising costs or eating out less, or why is that significant? And remember, it's not always about getting your translation into your own words. Does not need to be super concise, where it's about as few words as possible. As long as you have the right idea, it doesn't matter how many words you use. Okay, so give it a go just now, and then I am going to bring up the answers and go through them. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Right. Well, I'm going to try to move on. My computer is not cooperating. There we go. Now, we've got their bills, rising costs. Okay, so rising costs, it's becoming, the costs are what it costs the fish and chip shop to run. So things like their bills or the amount of money they're making doesn't match the amount of money they're having to spend. Fewer customers, people eating out less. Now remember, I have an English degree, so we like to think I can be quite brief. Not as many people are using their restaurant, that sort of thing. Okay, not as many people are having food there, that sort of thing. It means chippies and restaurants are having to put up their prices, charge more. Okay, they're worried about charging more than a tenner. So this is a tricky one. Numbers drive me mad. My classes will tell you, please be careful with numbers. Please don't start doing more than 11 and less than 11 and more than 9. Please stop doing all that. It's a tricky one. With numbers, it's usually best to just try and use words What this means is that chip shops are aware that people will not pay more than £10 for fish and chips. It's considered too expensive. This idea of breach the holy barrier, it is the amount of money at which they know no one would pay that for fish and chips. And they're worried about crossing this boundary of of charging people more than they ever have before, and that would be another way of doing it. Okay, arguably these bullet points are a bit easier because the minute numbers are involved, it's much harder. It's a bit like some of the tests that you may have done this year. You know, it is so easy for some of you to get fixated on 10 million people did this. So, you know, and many of you will start saying more than 9 million and less than 11, and it gets really complicated. Millions are lots, huge numbers, a huge number of people, blah, blah, blah. So watch for numbers because it is not helpful when you all start getting very mathematical at trying to, you know, where it's 1/10 of 100, you know. And I know you're laughing, but many of you do these sorts of things. So just watch for that, you know. What I would maybe say for this bit is they are aware that there is a price at which people will not pay for fish and chips, and as a result, they are cautious about breaking it. Okay, so something like that. But it is a lot easier to focus on these ones, arguably. Okay, and if you ever put an answer in, you think, oh, I really don't know if I've done that right, you can pop another bullet point in. A question I've been getting a lot this year, especially, and I think it's come from situations in other subjects. Can you put 4 points when you only need two? Absolutely. Can you put 10 points if it's 6 points? Absolutely. They are not counted against you. The marker will mark everything you've written and give you as many appropriate marks as possible. The only issue with that is time management. If you're going to write double the answer, so 4 things for every 2 thing, you might run out of time. But if you finish early, absolutely go back and add some bullet points in, or you're looking at your watch and you know you're good for time in a test, then add more in. It's always a good thing to do. Okay. Analysis. So we're nearly there. Analysis questions, obviously the technique questions. So just a wee reminder, do you know what the point of word choice is? What is the function of word choice? What is it that you're supposed to do with it? Imagery. What is imagery? And what is sentence structure? They are not actually techniques. They are umbrella headings for a number of techniques. What's tone and what's contrast? Now, do this in your head, even if you are not writing it down, because it's really good. That you can't possibly answer questions on it if you don't know what imagery is. Okay, so pause me, have a think. Do you know what those things are? And I will join you on the next slide. Okay, so imagery is simile, metaphor, or personification. Imagery is the word we use for all three of those, rather than saying each of those every time we wanted to talk about them. Each is a comparison, remember, so they kind of get grouped together. Sentence structure covers millions of things, but for the purposes of the ones most likely to come up, and just for quickness, I've narrowed it down to list, parenthesis, rhetorical question or question, colon, exclamation, dash, and short sentence. Now, this is what I asked you to do. Word choice explains what words connote, what they suggest, and for that you quote and explain. You get a mark for a quote, you get a mark for explaining. Remember, the quote should be short. It is word choice, not sentence choice. You can get away with maybe 3 words if it's a phrase or something like that. The more words you quote, the more you have to explain. So be careful. Try and keep it as short and concise as possible to what you're trying to explain. Simile, metaphor, and personification are all comparisons. Remember, similes, comparison using like or as. A personification is a type of metaphor in which something is given human qualities, and a metaphor is when something when you compare sorry, my mind's just gone blank now. You compare 2 things, and one is not real, one is real. It's basically like a simile without like or as. So you have explain the comparison, just as, so too. Okay, you have to explain the fake thing and the real thing. So my classes know I always use my love is like a red rose. In it, just as a rose is blah 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 blah, so too his love is blah 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 blah. That's how you would break it up. Now, just as a rose is beautiful and capable of growing and dying, so too the writer's love is a thing of great loveliness to him, but can wax and wane, can end. It's Robert Burns, so it often did, I'll be honest. Or it could grow into a thing of great beauty, something like that. There's loads of different ways to explain it, and I'm doing it really quickly and really badly. But you need to show what's real and what's not real. Okay. It could be shape, it can be size, it can be amount, it can be colour, it could be some unique quality. My love is a red rose as a metaphor. Okay, so it's that idea. If you're not sure, is it real? Okay, and that's usually a good way of knowing. Personification would be something like the sky cried. It's not really crying, it's raining, but water and raindrops and tears and things like that. Okay, the list, you've got them all here. I cannot stress this enough. A list of something emphasises the amount or scale of something. Write it out like that. You don't have to do anything else. You make it clear, what is it a list of? It can be a list of products, times, dates, chip shops that burnt down, anything like that. Emphasises the amount of what? Well, it emphasises, I would say, the amount of chip shops that burn down emphasises, I would say, the scale of the problem or how widespread it is, the number of businesses that end up in flames, something like that. Okay. Parenthesis is brackets, two commas, or two dashes. If you're never sure, brackets, there's parenthesis, oops, all over this because all the numbers are put in parenthesis. Brackets can only be a parenthesis. So if you're not sure, do brackets work? Commas are used all the time, and the difference between a list and a parenthesis, remember, is what are the commas doing? Commas for parenthesis is extra information that can be removed from the sentence. You know when something's a list because of the amount. I've got to do this and I've got to do that and I've got to, that sort of thing. Dashes, 2 lines on either side. There needs to be 2. If there is only 1 dash, that's number 6, and we'll come to that in a second. Now, it is extra information. You generally get a mark for saying it's extra information. But what are you being told about it? What is this extra information? Is it the writer's opinion? Is it giving you more information about what it's talking about? Something like that. It is to the context. Now, the problem with these generalised pages is if you wrote extra information explains what the writer's saying, that could apply to any parenthesis question in the history of RUE and close reading. You've got to be specific to your content. So that whilst this is telling you the standard thing and the steps to answer the question, you must always link it to, like you see here, what's the fictional half? What's the quote? What's the list of? What is the extra information? That sort of thing. Question, a rhetorical question has an answer that's either obvious, or a general question can just show writer's uncertainty, or they may be involving the reader. They may be getting you to think about it. It really depends on the content. Did they answer their own question? That sort of thing. Sometimes writers do. So that also gives you an idea. You get a mark for identifying a question and a mark for explaining it, and you'll get a mark for all of like these things that are, if you link them to the context. Number 4, colon. I should probably be clear about this because sometimes I am asked the difference between a colon and a semicolon. That is a colon. So the colon is the 2 full stops on top of each other. And that introduces, it is the only thing it does. Please just learn the word introduces for colon. It doesn't show, it doesn't explain, it just introduces, and it introduces a list or a definition, and you would say it introduces a list of blah, blah, blah. Although if there's a list there, just go for the list marks. If it's a 4-mark sentence structure question, then yeah, you could probably have both, but list is always easier to explain than dots. If you're really struggling, you'll get a mark for identifying a colon, but you must explain what it's introducing. Exclamation mark possibly should also, whoops, going completely rogue here. Exclamation mark, just in case you've forgotten what that is, and a dash is that. So basically, The exclamation mark shows the writer's emotions, anger, frustration, humour, that sort of thing. The dash, the line here, technically it should be a bit longer, that line, but you know, that's fine. A single dash pauses for drama, or it can act like a colon and give information. Two dashes, so if I had a line here and a line here, then it's two. So just make sure you count your dashes, because a number of times people say it's a parenthesis and it's not, because there's only one. And then number 7, very short sentence. I mean, really abrupt. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maximum words sort of thing. Really, really short. It's abrupt, it's shocking, very straightforward. It is linked to whatever the the writer is talking about. And then we've got tone is the emotion in the writer's in the speaker's voice, the writer's voice. That's why it's always easier when your teacher reads it, because they automatically tend to do the tone for you. Tone is super hard because you're in a silent exam, reading in your head. Many of you won't even be reading out loud in your head, if you know what I mean, where you're hearing the words in your head, if that makes sense. Sometimes you do need to read it back and work out what you think the tone is. Things like exclamation marks give you an idea. You're not asked tone every time, but it has been known to come up, so it's good to know, and it's good to guess. And if you don't know, you come up with the best tone that you can. Just don't start reading out loud in the exam hall, but you come up with the best thing. Now, it depends on the question. You could be given a quote and asked the tone, or you could be given a tone, and the very first RUE that you do, you are given a tone and then asked to prove the quote, way back at the start of the year, the Halloween one. So there are different ways of doing it, and it may not be relevant at all. If you have a use of language question and you are mega stuck, tone is sometimes useful if you're struggling. But like I say, I would, and I've put these in order of ease. Word choice is easier than imagery, and sentence structure, no doubt. Word choice is quote and explain, and it reminds you what to do. So definitely, you know, if you can, word choice it up. But imagery and sentence structure absolutely feature, and you absolutely need to learn them. Now, contrast can come up. Contrast, remember, is something like tall and short. It's when there's a difference, you need both sides of the contrast. If you just wrote tall, that's word choice. It's not contrast. Remember, you need tall and short for it to be both sides of a contrast to get the mark. Okay, so we've got a use of language question here. Now, you'll notice that I've called it use of language so that you can get as much out of this as you want. So what that means is there will be loads of different examples, and I haven't necessarily put an exhaustive list here, but what you're going to do is you're going to read it, you're going to identify what you can find, and you're going to try and explain it. So for this, I am going to have you read it yourself, and you're going to identify any techniques. Now, I've not put a question here yet, because what I think you should do is read it and see what you can see before we start getting into marks and things like that. Just what do you see and what could you explain? And then we'll narrow it down to a question. Now, I've popped the question up because I know some of you might be in a hurry. So what I would like you to do is for 4 marks, so remember that's 2 things, you know, quote or identify a technique, explain, quote, identify a technique, explain, for 4 marks. So you are going to have a go at this, and I'm going to get you on the next slide. So you can either try and do it in your head, although that would be quite hard, or make a note. Okay, now I'm going to move on. How does the writer's use of language convey the conflict between chip shops? So I had asked you just to look for a quick revision thing to see what you could find. Now we have to focus on something that shows us about the conflict, the disagreements between these chip shops. So have a look. What do you see that is connected to the conflict between chip shops? Okay, now pause me if you're not finished, and I'm going to pop on to the next slide. Okay, so in yellow, a couple of things that you can put here. Squabbles, property, parking, staffing, branding, packaging, naming rights, as well as dibs on who could sell which varieties of savoury pudding, fearful, and friars who fret. If you struggled, take those and try and answer the analysis question. So you would quote it, you then, and if you've forgotten, feel free to go back, even take a picture of this or a screenshot of it. Might be worth making a note in your jotter for revision practice of your notes or making cue cards, and then go back. What would you do with these answers in order to get your marks? And as always, I'm going to move on. So if you're not finished, pause me and you can catch me when you're ready. Okay, so let's start with squabble. Squabbles is word choice. So you get a mark for identifying that. The squabbles suggest petty fights, don't they? And that they're regular. There's more than one. So suggest number and petty fights. We then have property to pudding. Now you'll notice what I've done here is I've put property ... Now please be careful with ... You can't put it in a word choice question, but you can put it in a list. You do not need to waste time in a timed exam writing all of that. You put the first and the last word ... Is, I know I missed something out, understand I've included it, and it's a list, and that would get you a mark, which emphasises the amount of topics the chippies disagree over. Okay. We then have fearful and friars who fret. Now, fearful, so you can write fearful, you would get a mark, suggests that they worry about other people or they worry about the competition or, that sort of thing. Now, fret also means to be frightened or worried, and that's why they're together. Okay, they essentially mean very similar things. So it would be very hard for you to get 4 marks for that. And the way I've written my answer scheme, you wouldn't. You can only quote that or that. Friars who fret is alliteration. I'll come to that in a minute. But you have the idea of these chippy men, women who are worried and they take the competition seriously. They worry about other people. If you just quoted fret, that would also be fine. And then you have, for tone, the mocking, teasing tone of friars who fret or battercling. The idea that they're mocking this fight between them, okay? That they are, not taking seriously the conflict and the fights between these chip shops because of the little, like they fall out over whose batter's best, and or they're overly worried. Fret is a bit of a mocking type of worry. So bunch of different things. I think the 2 easiest ones are probably the top 2, but fearful would definitely work as well. I would imagine many of you would shy away from fret, and many of you, tone is at the bottom because it is the one you're least likely to do. So I hope that makes sense. So we're going to move on. Another paragraph here, and how does the writer's use of language convey one chip shop in particular is regarded as special? So what you're going to do is you're going to read it through and you're going to have a go at this question. You read it, you're going to identify the techniques that you think are connected to this question of how this one chip shop is regarded as special. You're going to quote and explain or identify technique and explain, and you're going to do that at least twice for me, and then you'll check you've got your answer correct. So I'm going to shut up now and you're going to pause and you're going to have a go at this, and I will catch you on the next slide where you can compare your answer to my answers. Oh, and I forgot, once again, your support there if you're stuck. Okay, so again, you think I'd know by now I've got a support slide in. We've got in yellow the things connected to the answer. And you've got a couple of different approaches here. So remember, if you're doing this very quickly, then you would be looking at these. What is your answer in your head? You should be able to do it, explain the quote or identify the technique and explain it. Now, I am going to move on, so please pause it if you are doing it a bit slower. And if you're ready to move on, then let's look at the answers together. Okay, so we've got the parenthesis of the Wises of Pittenweem. Is extra information that names this business. Exempted is word choice, and that means that they are not included in the rivalry. They have special permission not to be included. They're above the rivalry. They are, they're exempted means you don't have to be involved. People make a special excuse for you. Adored, beloved by everyone. One of the few places, rare, special, any of those would get you a mark, and they're in an unusual position or they're unique. The metaphor of gem shows that it's prized. Now, I've just dealt with gem as word choice, and there is a fine line sometimes between word choice and metaphor. But if you wanted, you very much could, just as, now remember, it's an inexpensive gem, so just be careful. That's why I opted to treat it as word choice. But just as a gem is blah blah blah, because it's about being rare and special. So just as a gem is a, try to think of another word for special, unusual, important, unique stone. So too, this chip shop is considered to be, that sort of thing. It's prized, people make a special excuse for it. And then sadly, this chip shop burnt down. So then we have a real change in our language with the word trauma, which suggests something that's deeply upsetting, because when it burned down, everyone was really upset about it. Now, what that does show you is we do have a parenthesis at the start, and there is the option for the metaphor, but most of these are word choice, and many of you perhaps assume word choice isn't fancy enough. If it's use of language and there's word choice there, you can absolutely use word choice. I've had a number of pupils sometimes overcomplicate answers, but make sure that you are just picking what most seems right to that answer and that question and in that context. Okay, so any of those will get you 4 marks. Now remember, you get the marks for the quote or the technique, even if you've not explained it very well. But remember, you will start dropping marks. If you do that in every analysis question, you will start hemorrhaging marks, if you're only getting 2 out of 4 each time. Okay, we are very nearly done. We are going back to evaluation for effective conclusion. So remember before I said to you the amount of work you need to do. I hope this has helped make sense. But having done the link question, the effective conclusion is essentially a link question of sorts. Quote from the end. So this is the final paragraph. So you're going to quote from this final paragraph, and then you're going to link to elsewhere in the passage. Now, often it's the beginning. The very end of the passage often goes back to the wee story at the very beginning. A lot of National 5 passages start with a wee story and it comes back to that wee story at the end. But sometimes it might go back to a fact that was mentioned. It may go back to another story that was mentioned. It may refer to a person or just some information you were given. So there are loads of different ways, but treat it a bit like a link question where you quote from the end and you link to earlier in the passage. If it's out of 4, which is a bit more unusual, but if SQA have opted to do that, you just do it twice. Okay, so you're going to make sure that if you read the article in which parts does it link to elsewhere. Now, you need to remember, I did not give you the full article. I have chosen sections of it so we could revise techniques. You could read the whole article so you could do this better, but there should be enough in this that we can link back on the information that you have. Okay, so read this red box for me and I will get you in the next slide. So pause as I'm about to click next. Oh, okay, I'm going to jump back because the first time ever I'm not supporting. So what to do is find your quote. Now it's up to you whether you want to make it out of 2 or 4 marks. It's entirely up to you. If you want to get more practice in, make it 4, but 2 is totally fine. You're going to find some quotes, you can explain them, and the next slide has the answer on it. Okay, so we've got "Paying my respects," linked back to Wise's funeral, reference to Ian Fleming, who had spoken throughout the passage and who the writer visits early in the passage. Rivals links back to the reference earlier to the difficulties between the chip shops, so that's definitely one you can do. And because you've literally just covered that, so it should be fresh in your mind. Another summer at least refers to the financial difficulties they're all having. We've covered that throughout today. And then, do you want fish and chips? Rhetorical question refers to the focus, again, it being about the the passage and the focus about the meal's attraction. So you should have been able to get the last few at least, okay? So I hope that shows you what you're being expected to do here. What I would recommend is, if you are looking to revise, can do very quick things like you can watch the news tonight, and I know that that will not be the jolliest thing that you'll have ever done, but can you put one of the stories in your own words? Can you take the ticker tape headlines that run across the bottom of the BBC and Sky News and stuff, and can you take a headline and put it in your own words? There on Twitter, there is hashtag N5HRUAE, and there's loads of articles from over the years. Sometimes we have a very short question. Loads of other schools started jumping on this as well, so there's lots of options. And there's lots of different article lengths, article types. The Guardian is free. You can easily go on there, pick an article on something you're interested in, and as you're reading, look for examples of good word choice. You don't need to write anything down. Can you explain the paragraph in your own words? Can you find a link sentence? And even read shorter articles and see, could you do the effective conclusion? And can you do it in your head? Not everything needs to be written down. Okay, so there are some good ways in which you can study. I hope you find this useful, apart from the few points where I've gone a bit wonky in places. I hope it's all made sense and it's helped you get helped you feel a bit more in control of your RUE revision. And I wish you luck if you're doing this prior to an exam or a test. Good luck.